Hi, this is Joshua Doan. I'm here with Chase Oliver to talk about a few of the important issues facing the country today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Just got back from a trip to Iowa, so I'm right now in the process of preparing myself for another trip this weekend to Ohio.
That's pretty much Ohio again?
For the first time, actually, it'll be the 26th state that I'll be crossing off my list that I've campaigned in.
Oh, okay. What was the one you just got back from?
Oh, Iowa and Nebraska. So I just got back from Iowa, where I got the good news that I'm actually going to be appearing at the Iowa State Fair on the political soapbox next month. So I'll be the first
Excellent.
libertarian who's ever been allowed to do that.
Boxing is fun. I helped Rossi for governor to do that way back when we still had the opportunity to get other people than Democrats elected in Washington State.
Yeah.
So, a few of the issues I wanted to go over with you are some of the big ones to, I think, a lot of people today. The biggest and most important one seems to be the libertarian take on issues like immigration.
hmm
So, it's hard to marry the libertarian perspective on immigration with an entitlement system. So, I was wondering what your take was on how, if you were in power, how you would move forward on immigration while at the same time not accidentally growing the entitlement structure and collapsing the whole thing.
That's a good question, and it's a question you get a lot of times when you're a libertarian on immigration, right? First and foremost, I like to think that if I were president, or if any libertarian were president, we could walk and chew gum at the same time. We could be looking to reduce the welfare state while also opening up our borders to allow more people who want to come here to work, to simplify the system, so we're not having this shadow economy and all these people who are stuck kind of in the shadows, and because of that are rife for abuse, both from the government and from employers and other people, right? So we can do both of those things at the same time. I always tell people that, if I change my position on immigration, like my principles, my libertarian principles on immigration, because the government has created a welfare state, that would be me changing my principles based on the actions of what government does. And I think if you're a libertarian, you have to hold fast to our principles. So I actually reject the excuse that some people give of we can't fix immigration until we fix the welfare state, because I think you could use that in all kinds of things. Well, we can't end gun restrictions until we solve the problem of violence in our communities, right? That could be an excuse that one would use. But the truth is that we actually have to stand by our principles there and defend the free and open immigration of people. And there are human victims here, human victims at the border who die trying to cross, victims of trafficking, which if we opened our immigration system, it would leave more time for the police and border enforcement to crack down on those abuses. And then there are people who, I tell this to people all the time, if you're thinking about immigration, you need to think to yourself, how many immigrant wives and how many immigrant children suffer abuse at home and they can't go tell anybody for fear of deportation? That's the kind of environment we're creating for millions of people if we don't fix our immigration system. So it's vital to do it.
So, the a libertarian immigration system, how would you envision that looking? So, are you talking about just throwing open the borders and not tracking, whether who comes in and who comes out? Like, there's no definition of citizenship anymore, or are you talking about making it far easier to legally immigrate?
Well, there's two things there. So, first and foremost, I support like an Ellis Island style of immigration. I'm a minarchist, so I do believe there's like legitimate functions for government, and one of those things is to protect national sovereignty. And you do that by creating an Ellis Island system where someone can come through our entryways. They give their name, they submit to a basic check to make sure that they're not wanted for extradition with anywhere else for committing a crime or violence or something like that. And then they check them to make sure that they're not carrying a communicable disease that can really harm a lot of people within our borders. That's the basic what you need to bring people in to come to work. That's a different conversation than citizenship, which is also far too complicated to process and do. It's why it takes so long for so many people. But I do believe there's a process to have citizenship that we could simplify and streamline so that people who do come here to work over time can become citizens, can become productive members of the American family, right? And not just a foreign worker. It's what my family did. They came here, and within a generation, they had an entire, they were part of the American dream. They had put down roots. They had owned property. They were able to vote. We need to make it so much easier because right now people are waiting like around a decade to become a citizen from the time they sign up. And I think we can do that more quickly. It's like the worst DMV ever, right? Is just waiting 10 years to be able to be called a citizen. And so I think we can fix that process while also respecting the fact that there are people who came here earlier who are already in line for that. If we streamline that, we can move those people through quicker, and then any additional workers who come through can quickly be moved through that process if they want to stay here and put roots down here in America. Also, a liberal immigration policy like opening it up allows for those who want to just be seasonal workers to come here and work and then go right back home. They don't have to stay here for fear of like not being able to get back across the border next season.
As someone with a wife who's foreign born, I can definitely attest to how needlessly complicated and painful the citizenship process is. It's almost as if they're trying to make it as painful and punitive as possible and expensive as possible, and time consuming. And then when you finally get your citizenship, it's clearly all just up to the whim of the person that you're talking to. And they just sign a check mark, you raise your hand, and you're a citizen.
Yeah. So I think we can make that process easier, less expensive, less time consuming. I wish we could have done it for you earlier, right? So that you wouldn't had to go through all that process. But we want to make sure that the next group of foreign born folks who want to come here and become Americans have the ability to do that, because we want to make sure that the best and the brightest and all the hardworking people come to this country. It's what built this country. It's what makes us so strong, because we have the diversity of cultures and opinions and all these things, as opposed to being a homogeneous nation, right? So like, this is something that makes us stronger when we have immigrants. And the reality is we're going to have a lot of workers retiring, and we're going to need a lot of labor over the next 20 or 30 years. And immigration is actually something that can really help this country's economic engine keep running. So long as we are honest with ourselves and say, hey, let's bring these folks in and contribute to the American family.
Yeah, I've spent the past 10 years in the manufacturing industry, and I will tell you this: if we want to move any manufacturing back to the United States, we need to fundamentally reduce the amount of costs and labor for those jobs, because nobody in the United States right now is willing to do a factory job. The amount of effort that it takes to do that and the amount of money that you make doing that is not something that the average American worker is willing to do. A lot of foreign workers are willing to do that. So if we want to repatriate a lot of production, I think it will require a lot of immigration and a lot of changes in the fundamental way we look at labor. Now, the flip side of the coin that you were talking about a moment ago, how would you cut back those entitlement systems at the same time? Because you said you wanted to do, chew gum and walk at the same time. So I'd love to hear how you'd cut back entitlements.
Yeah, so entitlements is like, they always call it the third rail of American politics. And that's because, there are always going to be people who get hurt when you change the policies. And so with that, it creates, a little bit of political hazards, right? But I think we have to get off the entitlements. There's just no way we can continue to afford them at the rate that they're growing and at the rate it's causing to add to our debt and deficits. So if workers like myself want to make sure that we have an economy that functions by the time we're retiring, you have to really look at entitlement reform and get rid of those entitlements now. You're not going to be able to do it instantly, right? Like my parents, they live on a fixed income, as do millions and millions of Americans. They worked for their entire lives. They have now, relying on the fixed income that's provided to them through Social Security, Medicare. And so we have to take that into account as we reduce these programs. We have to let those who are currently on them and existing and living on them to do that. But we need to make sure that the process is starting to reduce these programs over time, so that by the time workers like myself, or even Gen Xers, who are the younger Gen Xers, who are still have a good 20 years to save before retirement, they can do that if we allow them to get out of these entitlement programs, put that wealth back in their pocket, allow them to invest privately in the marketplace. And over time, we're going to see those programs disappear. We're going to see us able to actually reduce our debt and deficits to pay the debt down if we get rid of these entitlement programs. And we'll have a stronger, healthier economy for workers when they retire, particularly workers who are my age, who are, right now, if we keep it as it exists right now, we'll just have a cratered economy and no Social Security, or we can fix it right now and have a not cratered economy and no Social Security. I think the latter is better than the former.
Although I think you might find that finding that particular line and where to draw it in the sand might upset a lot of people. Like myself, I paid a lot into Social Security, but I already know that's not going to be available to me by the time I retire. So I can't bank on that. And I would far rather give up all that money I paid into Social Security for, a couple 10, 20 years of a decent economy where I can actually build up into retirement on my own. I know a lot of conservatives and libertarians would agree on that. But then again, there's going to be a lot of people who are like, I paid into that for, 30, 40, 50 years. I want to get my money out of it.
Yeah, there's no way that you're not going to have people feeling some pain from this. And that's actually why it's a third rail, right? But we have to have the courage to do that. Milton Friedman gave an example one time about like why we have to cut spending and cut deficits and cut debt. And he likened it to alcoholism, right? Like Alcoholism is a terrible disease. It harms lots of people, and you want to get off of the bottle, right? But when you take the bottle out of the drunk's hand, they have a period of detoxing where it's very painful, and it's not pretty, and it has a little bit of hurt to it. But overall, once you get past that period, the body will begin to heal itself, and you'll have a longer, stronger living, healthier body overall. And so right now we are at the point where we've been guzzling straight grain alcohol for 50 years. And we're at a point where we have to get that bottle out of our hands, because if we don't, we're going to die, like figuratively speaking, right? And so there will be pain. Possibly. There will be pain, but we have to be honest about that too. And that's the thing that a lot of people who talk about entitlement reform don't mention, that there's going to be pain from it. But the pain will be far less than the pain that we would experience as younger workers in 30 or 40 years when these entitlements come due, and there's nothing to show for it. So, it's a matter of degrees of pain. We are either going to hurt a little now, or we're going to hurt a lot more later. And I think we need to go ahead and kind of take our medicine, so to speak, get our economy back in order, and fix this stuff before people my age are really suffering at a time when we can't afford it, when we have a worker shortage crisis, and we have millions and millions of people retiring. So that's what I'm working towards right now, is to make sure. I don't think next quarter or next 2 years like most politicians. I'm thinking the next 20 or 30 years, and making sure it's solid, a foundation for me to be able to retire on when I get to my 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, like any investor or businessman would tell you, you can't throw good money after bad. And our entire retirement system is bad money at this point. So scrapping it and taking care of the people who are too old to rebound or adapt into the new system is one thing, but we can't keep dumping money into it like it's going out of style, which actually goes into the next question. What do you think about all this inflation, and how would you address it?
Yeah, so inflation is it's a kitchen table economic issue. So if we're not talking about as libertarian candidates, we're failing our voters, because it's the number one issue for most voters. It's the economy. The way I explain that to the average voter is, we have to stop spending more than we're taking in. We create dollars out of thin air, and that devalues all of our dollars, creating the inflation we see. So we have to balance the budget immediately. If I were elected president, the first budget that I would want would be at least, and when I say at least, I'm welcome to make it smaller, but I want it to be balanced and at least to pre-pandemic spending levels, so that we can stop this crazy out of control $6-7 trillion a year that we're adding to the debt, that we did during the pandemic. We need to get back to that, and we need to balance whatever budget is brought to me. And if I'm president, I'll veto any budget that isn't balanced, and I will shut down the government until a balanced budget is brought in front of me. And someone said, well, won't that hurt people? Again, we have to take our medicine now. We have to get our economy in order now. And we have to be, as libertarians, willing to call that bluff, and tell the American voter we're willing to call that bluff. If you can't bring us a balanced budget, then you shouldn't be legislating and appropriating money, because every single household in America has to balance their budget. They have to make sure they live within their means. And the government, just because they have the ability of central banks to print trillions and trillions of dollars out of thin air, has negated that responsibility and that obligation to the American voter. And we need to get back to those principles. So a balanced budget is the first step towards controlling inflation and reducing the central banking's control over our economy. And that's something I want to see. And I would remind conservatives that the last time we had a balanced budget was actually under a Democratic president. We've never had a Republican president in the last 25 years that has balanced a budget of any kind. Now, those Democrats did it with tax increases and other things. I would do it by cutting government. But the fact remains that conservatives have nothing to run on if they want to run on fiscal responsibility. And it's time, if you're a conservative who cares about those things, to really look about voting libertarians, because we are actually serious when we talk about it. We won't talk the talk and then refuse to walk when the time comes. We want to cut inflation. We want to stop inflation in its tracks, and we want to stop the growth of government. We can do those things if we have the political courage to do it. And that's why I'm running.
That makes sense. So how would you define the kind of double standard of them taxing us while at the same time printing tons of money, which is, everybody knows, is a secret tax? Would there be any consequences to them doing that?
Well, I think, the first step towards actually getting central banking under control is allowing the legislature to audit it so that it knows what's going on. I would join, one of the things that really attracted me about Ron Paul when he ran for president earlier in the, in the 2008-2012 cycle, was he had put legislation in Congress to audit the Fed, because he knew once Congress has the ability to audit the Fed, they're going to uncover all kinds of terrible things that will create the political will for people to end the Fed. And so I think that's a great first step, is to join with any Democrats and Republicans in Congress to pass audit the Fed legislation, to put the Fed right in at the purview and the oversight of the legislature, which is ostensibly elected to represent each and every one of us at the legislative level. And so let's put that responsibility in the legislature's hands. Let's expose the wrongdoing that happens at the central banking. And when you do that, once we audit the Fed, people want to end the Fed. I want to end the Fed right now, but the political will doesn't exist for it. So we have to create the conditions that will create that political will. And first step of doing that is exposing the wrongdoing. And so again, I would do exactly what Ron Paul said when he was running for president. Let's pass an audit to the Fed, and then the American people will demand an end to the Fed.
I forget who said it, but corruption does thrive in the darkness.
And yeah, and so it's up to us and to demand that we shine a light on these things. And that goes really across the spectrum of political policy. So let's get that done.
So what are the three major sectors of the government where you would cut, and how would you cut them?
Yeah, I get that asked.
In your first term.
Yeah, I get that question asked a lot. So like I liken the government to an onion, and there's lots of layers there. So I would immediately start to peel the first biggest layer that's been created in my lifetime, and that would be the Department of Homeland Security. It was created in the wake of 9/11. It spends billions and billions of dollars to funnel money to federal agencies that could be better used elsewhere, that could be better used under a different purview. And of course, there's all the abuses and scandal that has come out of it, warrantless wiretapping, information gathering, these kinds of things that need to be ended, that aren't making us any more safe. It is just allowing the government to have more and more control and authority over us. So that would be the first department I would seek to end because it's the latest one to be created. But let's get real with some other things that could find political viability. I think the Department of Education is ready to be eliminated. I think you could find the political will there with Congress to get it done if you work hard enough, because more and more people are getting onto the school choice bandwagon. They want to see school choice localized, even if possible, even if it's taxpayer funded, at the most possible, going to that individual parent and student to decide where that taxpayer money should go to. So I think there's a real will to eliminate the federal Department of Education, just block grant all that money right back to the states where it belongs. And then, I'm one for looking into eliminating not just whole departments, but like going into the departments that do exist and gutting programs and things that exist that are either redundant or do nothing to really serve us. I'm sure there's tons and tons of stuff. If you gave me time to really just go through all the Justice Department programs or even the Treasury or the State Department, I'm sure there are things we can eliminate that are just basically redundant or wastes of taxpayer money. And we could just reduce the administrative size of the state in 4 years if we really put our minds to it and have a government that still was well functioning, or actually that was better functioning than exists today, but that costs less and requires less manpower there. So I think there's a lot of areas to cut. But if you were to give me like my first couple right there, Homeland Security and the Department of Education both really need to go at the federal level.
Love that. Both of them. I mean, at this point, education system really just has become federal indoctrination camps.
But really what it is a scheme from the federal government to have more control over state governments, because what they do is they say, hey, we'll give you this, we're going to give you this $1 of funding, per student. But, oh, by the way, we're going to put $1.15 worth of regulation on that. And so now you states are stuck with this regulation, because if you want that federal money, and you're not going to say no to federal money, because if you do, you're going to get voted out of office, right? Because they're going to say you don't care about kids.
Exactly.
And so it's just another mechanism for the federal government to top down control the population, where really that sovereignty really belongs to each and every individual parent to decide where their kids are going to be educated and how. So I would just look to create those conditions.
Well, as someone with toddlers, I'm not going to send my kids to public school. All they do is churn out NPC yes men.
Well, I think what you get when you go into school is, and regardless of the ideology, I'm sure there are some schools that are going to be very public schools that are super progressive. There are going to be other ones that are more conservative. But either way, what they do is they try to quell dissent. They try to, a lot of times, the worst of the worst public schools, they basically try to remove critical thinking, which is a problem. That doesn't mean there aren't really, and I want to say this, there are good public schools out there. They're just more rare. And there are really well-meaning teachers out there. And that's the biggest thing about choice in education that I think we forget about. We always talk about parents and students. We forget to talk about teachers that are stuck in a terrible public school system, and they know they could teach better. They know there are better ways to get through to kids, but they're stuck through the regulatory state having to teach this way. And if we ended the public school system tomorrow, many of those public school teachers would still be teachers. They would find jobs teaching. They would just be able to teach their own way and in a way that they think might be more effective. So when we're talking about the victims of the public school system, it's not just parents, it's not just students, it's also far too many teachers that get stuck in that system.
That actually leads me to a very big question I have for you that might be
Mhm.
touchy for a lot of libertarians. I've got a half dozen teachers in my extended family, and they say one of the worst problems and the source of a lot of the corruption in the school system are the teachers' unions, who make it so the bad teachers are impossible to fire and it's impossible to improve the system. Would there be anything you think you could do, and would you even want to take action against the unchallenged power of the teachers' unions?
Well, public sector unions are typically a bit of a problem to begin with because they already have the force and the administrative power of the state behind them, right? And so I think, when you look at this kind of stuff, it's not quite the same as, say, like a private union. I have two brothers who work in electrical unions. They provide them the training and are competitive in the workforce. It's a right to work state, but those union workers are trained better and they get paid better as a result. And so I'm all for people pooling their labor and capital in the private market. But publicly, I think it presents real challenges. And, if I were president today, I would look to see what we can do to kind of bust those things up, because that doesn't mean that I don't think teachers should be well paid. It doesn't mean that I don't think there should be great teachers out there. I think often what we see from teachers unions actually is protecting bad teachers at the expense of good teachers. And, we see this kind of, well, I've been there for so long, so I should be able to keep my position. When in reality, a lot of these teachers aren't doing the best job. And there are better teachers who are younger and hungrier and ready to get up there and do these things. So oftentimes those unions are a detriment to newer teachers, and it actually cools off the amount of people who want to become teachers, because they do see that it's much harder to break through in the industry when there's just kind of this ensconced power system for people who have been there for a long time, who, regardless of how well they do the job, because of their union position, they maintain a hierarchy that is above those newer teachers. So I would seek to make the marketplace more competitive, so that way we have the real marketplace competition we want to see for teachers and educators, that teachers unions just right now in the public school model prevent.
Imagine that, letting the natural forces of the marketplace affect incentives. What a lot of people have knew early on in Biden's presidency, but I think forgot very quickly, was he shattered records for executive orders. So I'm wondering how many of his executive orders you would roll back, how quickly, and whether you would roll back even ones that President Trump made, because he made a lot of executive orders that really messed with the economy of the United States, like the Trump tariffs.
Mhm.
That really disrupted the existing flow of goods right when the US economy was experiencing disruptions from the lockdowns and overprinting of money. So I'm wondering just how many of those would you aggressively go after these far-reaching executive orders?
Yeah, well, I think if I were president, the first thing you're going to learn is that what can be done can be undone via executive order, right? And so I would look to actually undo that. But and even I'll even go a step further. If I were president, I would seek to start reducing the power that the executive authority has, that the executive branch has. I tell people all the time, if I were elected president, after I get done with pardoning thousands of people on day one, the next step is actually looking to how I can reduce the power of the presidency and the power of the office. If I were elected president and I leave 8 years later, like let's say I get reelected, that office would be far weaker than the office that I stepped into, because I believe in relinquishing power at the executive level, giving it back to either the legislative branch, who has basically abandoned their obligations and deference to just letting the executive handle it because they can't get anything together or get anything done, or returning power directly back to people as it exists in the executive branch. So I would certainly be a president who I'd be technically the office would be strongest on day one and weakest on the day that I leave. And I would seek to govern via legislation, not via executive order, because no matter what I did, if a tyrannical Democrat or Republican just jumped in there, they would just undo it all. So I would have to take
What
the tough but necessary path there and not govern via executive order.
what would you say then to people who say that the judicial system has been growing in power and been taking power that is undue and not theirs?
Honestly, I think, I think there's, you can always look into that kind of stuff. I haven't really, I think I don't like seeing courts legislate from the bench, but I do like them seeing interpreting laws and throwing bad laws out or supporting good constitutional laws. Like, I think that is the place for the court. But again, I don't like legislating from the bench. But at the same time, it seems that, when you look at, say, the affirmative actions getting thrown out, or even things like defense of same-sex marriage. Like, we've had court decisions over the last few years that have actually shown the court to be like maybe the most active branch is actually doing things, doing their job, which, I could condemn them if they were overstepping their bounds, but I will give them credit when they're actually doing the work they're supposed to do, which Congress often just doesn't do. And the executive often does far too many things that they are not supposed to be doing. I would say even more so than the judicial branch. The judicial branch would have to get really corrupted and really out of place before it gets anywhere near how bad the executive branch abuses its authority. So if we're looking up, on a scale of 1 to 10 or like listing it out, the judicial branch certainly falls behind the executive and possibly behind the legislative, just because they've abandoned so much of their obligations in terms of how bad they are for the good of the American people.
So on a kind of side issue that's related to this, how do you feel about the recent decision about affirmative action?
Yeah, I think, colleges should be using, I don't like seeing race-based admissions. That doesn't mean that colleges can't be diverse and have lots of different types of people and different types of backgrounds and cultures and all that stuff. And in fact, like I said earlier, I think that's what makes our nation actually strong and powerful and an economic powerhouse. I think in the realm of education, educators should feel the same way in higher education. But I don't think that this is maybe the best way to go about that stuff, because it invariably just creates kind of gaps that people fall through. I would rather, institutions make up their own rules with admissions and let the market react to that. And that's kind of how I feel. I actually agree with the ruling and would support it. So, yeah.
Would you support a constitutional amendment to roll back the income tax?
I mean, yes. But the thing about constitutional amendments is they're very, very difficult to pass. So we're going to have to really bully pulpit ourselves and get out there and preach the message of why we don't need an income tax. But yes, I would prefer, if we're going to have any kind of taxation, it not be an income tax, because I think that's just kind of the worst way to levy taxes on people, because it stifles productivity. And so I think there's just far better ways for the government to collect its revenue than to tax you at the point of earning, as opposed to maybe consumption or through voluntary or fee-based or other ways that we can raise revenues, as opposed to the punishing and crippling income tax. We passed a constitutional amendment to allow it. We would have to pass a constitutional amendment to fully repeal it. But I would look to replace it as soon as possible, certainly.
I think a lot of libertarians have a problem with it out of the moral context of what it says about the government owning a portion of your labor.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think you own yourself, you own your labor, and anything that the government should collect from us should be taken basically, like I said, at a point of consumption when you're deciding to spend your money, or from fees and other associated things that government can charge to say, hey, we have to provide this coverage or this service, so we do need to cover the cost, right? That's a much better way than just taking money out of somebody's paycheck via taxation and income tax. And I'm being realistic with it. As a monarchist, I do believe you have to have some kind of state. There has to be some sort of minimal revenue collection in the utopian ideal of the monarchist. But it's far less impactful than what we would see today, and it would be collected far more morally than what we have with the income tax, for sure.
That's why you're the libertarian candidate, not an anarchist candidate.
Well, there's anarchists in our party. I'm just not one of them. But I welcome them to get on the reduce the state train up until we get to that minarchist utopia. And then I'll just get off at Minarchy Station and they can continue down the train if they want. But we got a lot of track. We got a long travel to get to even that point. So I would tell anarchists who maybe are like, hey, I don't want any taxation. Well, you're going to get far less with a libertarian minarchist, and you're actually going to get the ideas out there that reducing the state is a good idea. So I encourage you guys to join us. Pair up with us. I love you anarchy folks, but I'm a minarchist. And maybe while we're working together, you'll convince me that anarchy is the true path. But we'll never know if we don't work together, right?
Well, I think that you wouldn't be able to apply an anarchy system without first applying a libertarian system, because people would need to get used to the reduced government. Because if you just suddenly snapped your fingers with a genie and vanished all government, you would have utter absolute chaos and death and destruction on a scale that would be...
People just wouldn't be prepared for it. If you could Thanos snap all government away, it sounds really good, right? And it's very tempting.
It sounds beautiful, but
it's very tempting for me to go find the infinity gems to do that, right? to be able to just snap it all away. But it's going to require a lot of work, and that's why I'm putting in the time and effort right now to do that, and to make sure the libertarians are in the best position available to have an impact in 2024.
People would need to be in the habit of caring for themselves and being independent free thinkers before that could be applied.
Absolutely.
So the one that's probably going to make the libertarians and anarchists the most upset is, what is your feelings about national defense? And when you have big, world-class powers invading countries, what do you think that we should do, or if anything, when countries are just being colossal bullies and conquering?
Yeah. So so first off, national defense. You're right. As an anarchist, I believe in that. I believe that there's a legitimate need to defend ourselves and defend our nation's sovereignty from invasion. We could do all of that with probably half or less of the amount of the price tag that the Pentagon gives us if we just rolled back our military footprint in every other continent other than North America. Like, the United States is in North America. That is where the primary amount of our defense system should be to be able to defend ourselves from invasion. I think anything else, is kind of empire building or imperialism over there. So I kind of take a step back from that. And as far as like wars, like the big war right now is in Ukraine. I think we can absolutely condemn the government of Russia for invading the sovereign borders of another country without saying, okay, well, now we also have to commit billions and billions of dollars to fight this proxy war. I think, if anything, the United States, the first step we should have done is said, any refugee that wants to get out of Ukraine right now, we will bring in with asylum immediately. And we'll also do the same to any Russian dissident who doesn't want to be conscripted in their army.
Yes,
out of the war zone. Let's come over to the United States and we'll bring you in with asylum, because that's the ultimate way to do it. Is let's get innocent bystanders out of the battlefield and out of the war zone. And let's do all we can to take soldiers off the front line of the Russian military, right? By allowing them to defect to the United States and create that internal dissension in Russia. Like, if every Russian military member knew, hey, if you can get outside of Russia to any country that's friendly to you, we will bring you to the United States with asylum. You're going to have so many deserters immediately going AWOL who don't want to fight in Ukraine that it will end the war effectively overnight. That needs to be our policy. And we don't have to drop one bomb, spend $1 on cluster munitions or fighting the proxy war just to say that anybody who wants out of the war zone can get out of it today, immediately. And if we did that, we would not have a war in Ukraine.
Interesting point of context. My in-laws are Russo-Ukrainian, and the Russian part of that, when the war started, they were all very hesitant about it, not in support of it. But whenever we see people that have a son drafted, suddenly they become ultra-nationalist pro-invasion. And we are certain it's because they're afraid of retaliation against their son or father who's been drafted if they are too loud against the war. So these people being drafted forces them to become political supporters of the war.
Yeah, and we have a real issue like with we have to be able to call out bad behavior where it is, and part of that is the terrible behavior of the Putin administration. Right? They quell any dissent. We think we have it bad with free speech because we get banned on Twitter or Facebook, which is like not really government banning free speech. That's a private platform, but regardless, try being an anti-war protester in Russia. Try being a gay rights protester in Russia and see how you're treated. You literally get dragged away by agents of the state, thrown into an unarmed van, and driven away. Like, it is horrible. And so I will give no love to the government of Russia. They are a government that if they had the power of the United States, we would be in the worst kind of world. I'm glad that the government of Russia is so much smaller than our government in terms of impact around the world, because if we had Vladimir Putin with the size of our economy and the size of our military and the ability to do things, we would live in a fundamentally messed up world. And as bad as our government is, we ain't Russia, baby, and we have mechanisms to try to stop us from getting that bad. And we need to really utilize those things and work together towards becoming a more free nation, as opposed to one that is less free, that looks like a Russia or a North Korea out there in the world.
Right. Completely agree with you there. If we had Putin as president, we would be in a 1984 situation we have always been at war with East Asia.
Yeah, the worst thing I could think of is a KGB agent being the leader of the world, right? Like the most powerful, head of the most powerful government there. So, so it's very easy for me to both condemn Vladimir Putin, but also say our place is not on the battlefield in Ukraine. Our place is to be providing humanitarian aid and the ability for people who want to get out of that war zone to do so.
Excellent. Well, I think those are the major topics. Is there something you wanted to cover?
Well, I do want to let your listeners know, so I'm creating a little bit of history here. As I said at the very beginning, I just got back from Iowa. And the reason I'm campaigning a lot in Iowa is because, well, they have the first of the nation caucuses. All the two-party candidates are out in Iowa campaigning and doing that stuff. And with them comes a lot of media attention and a lot of folks who are really, really keyed into the election. And so I'm spending my time campaigning there. And now I've been invited by the Des Moines Register to actually speak at the Iowa State Fair. I'm the first non-Republican, non-Democrat to ever do that. So Gary Johnson never got to do that. Joe Jorgensen didn't get to do that. I'll be the first presidential candidate that has that ability to do that. I'm also going to be in the straw poll out there. So let's hope that I can beat down some Republican candidates in the straw poll and show how strong the liberty message is. But really, I encourage all of your listeners to check out the campaign. We are super busy. Like I said, we're about to hit our 26th state. We're going to hit all 50 before the national convention next May. And, so right now, if you want to go to my website, votechaseoliver.com, you can see how busy all of us are, or follow me on social media. Look for Chase for Liberty on all of your major platforms. And there's a good chance that I have a presence there. So check it out, get involved. If you like what you see from the campaign, become a member of your state's party and become a delegate at your next state convention and become an Oliver delegate at the national level. We would love to have you. And we are going to fight the two-party system in the state that it's created together. And we're going to do it in a way that's got energy, enthusiasm, and knocks the Republicans and Democrats off balance and make sure we disrupt this election and move the Overton window towards liberty. I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make that happen. If we work together, we can make it happen together. But I need your help. So go to votechaseoliver.com, join our team, and if you can become a donor supporter, it is much appreciated. So that's my sales pitch that I have to throw at every media appearance I do. But I just want to say thank you for having me here to speak with you. And next time I get up to Washington State, let's grab a beer or something to that effect. Next time I'm up in the Pacific Northwest.
Excellent. We look forward to seeing what you can accomplish.
Thanks so much.